Welcome to Your Career Unscripted. I'm your host, Jane Bernhard. I will be interviewing business leaders and recent graduates on the different perspectives, strategies, challenges, and advice on building meaningful careers across different generations. There's no right way to build your career or live your life. And I'm so excited that this show is in collaboration with Texas Immersive Institute at the University of Texas. We hope to help you define success on your terms and not anyone else's. Our guest today is Nanea Reeves. Nanea is the founder and CEO of TRIPP, an award-winning XR wellness company, and the creators of the leading meditation app delivering mood on demand to users worldwide. Nanea is a gaming executive and serial entrepreneur with $1.6 billion in exits and a lifelong meditator who began the practice in her teens as a way to cope with trauma. She founded TRIPP in 2017 following a period of tremendous loss to use technology in order to expand access to mindfulness around the world. Hi, Nanea. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Hi, Jane.
I have learned so much from you in business and career strategy. I also love your company. I use your app truly every day. I was using it before this interview. I love the mission of your company. Our conversation at South by on careers changed my perspective of corporate careers. Honestly, I've learned so much. I'm honored to have you on. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here. And when you say that our conversation at South by changed your career, what specifically did you find really connected with you? And then how did that apply?
Yeah, so I think I didn't realize how strategic you have to be in corporations. You talked a lot about kind of careers as a game, which is one of the questions I want to ask you about.
Yeah, sure.
And I hadn't heard that analogy before. I think it's so easy to get sort of focused on like the day-to-day work and not thinking about the strategy behind everything that you're doing. And
Right.
so it helped me kind of shape my next steps in terms of really mapping them out and not just
Right.
kind of allowing things to happen. And I really hadn't heard someone talk about that before. And also, I quit acting years and years and years ago, but I still feel like no one talked to me before about the game of work. Like I had not heard that before. And I would love, if you're comfortable, to just hear you talk about it. I'm sure there are people who are listening to this who also haven't heard that analogy. And honestly, it kind of opened my mind up a lot.
Yeah, I think you can also think of life in and of itself as a game. In many ways, it helps you to, or at least for me, and when I say you, when I'm speaking about sort of concepts that I've found helpful, it's mostly an accumulation of inputs from a lot of people I've had the good fortune of working alongside, and then kind of taking what suits me, sometimes trying some of their concepts on and throwing out certain parts of it that don't work for me. So, I preface what I'm going to say with that. But for me, as a young woman, when I was starting to work in career or even in tech specifically, but even before that, when I started working in advertising, et cetera, oftentimes I felt people were dismissing me and my feelings would get really hurt by that. I felt like I wasn't being seen or heard. I was thought more as kind of just fluffy or, set dressing, as it were. And I found like this chip on my shoulder was getting bigger and bigger. And I kept looking for the evidence of why I didn't matter in the workplace. And it just really wasn't helping me. And I have been a gamer my whole life. And I had just like kind of one of those auspicious moments. I was at a garage sale and I found this old book from the 70s called Games Mother Never Taught You, Corporate Gamemanship for Women. And it was written, from that voice of the 70s feminist. But there was so much rich data in there that I realized that I was showing up not playing the game at total effect and in reaction mode to how I was being treated, and not really figuring out, how do I play the game that's being played here and play it to win? And all of a sudden, like that shift, because I love playing games, I love playing video games, and it sort of brought the fun back into my day, because I would start looking at people and their interactions with me more as like a move. And then what was my response to that move going to be? And I liken it to when my cousins and I would spend the summer playing Monopoly. And when you play Monopoly by the rules and you follow, it's fun. But when you start negotiating and doing side deals and really kind of strategizing how you're going to take up real estate that every dice roll will land on, suddenly the game becomes kind of a completely different game, and you can be kind of aggressive about things, but it's all in that nature of fun and competition. And that's really what I was missing in my approach to how I showed up in the workplace. And then, interestingly enough, once I started doing that, I was invited more to the table. I would hear things like, "Oh, Nanea's strategic. She's different," which, people don't even realize like what their unconscious bias is and what that implies, that other people who look like me aren't strategic. And I would hear, "She's fun to work with. We love having her on the team." And I started getting more and more responsibility. And so it was really kind of a wake up call to me that I was approaching it all wrong, and I was not really playing to win.
Thank you for explaining that. I'm curious if you could talk to like the audience for this show ideally is young people who want career advice from leaders such as yourself. And when you
Mhm.
talk about how thinking of using gaming strategy in your career and your life, I think
Right.
that a lot of people might identify with the concept but not know how to execute it. Do
Right.
you have any advice for someone who maybe is getting a lot of resistance from their manager, or they don't
Mhm.
like their day-to-day job but they like the company and they want to move up, like tactical and strategic steps on kind of doing what you're talking about and playing the game?
Yes. First of all, you have to identify what is the game actually being played in the environment you're in, not the game you want to be played, right? And there's also something that book by, her name is Betty Lenahan, and Harrigan Lenahan. It's an amazing book. I have several copies on my bookshelf behind me that I'm always referencing, and I give that book away a lot. And it's out of print, but you can definitely find versions of it. The understanding of hierarchy, and that can vary within every organization. And some of us have been raised to just think like we're all amazing and we can do everything, and there's some truth to that. But you also do have to understand hierarchy and how an organization is structured, and different companies might approach that differently. Some are very flat and there's a lot of autonomy, and others aren't, right? And so, first and foremost, my job is to support my direct manager and make her or him successful and look great and look super smart for hiring someone like me, right? So that requires a sense of trust as well, that they can hear your input and it's given in a way that they will hear. And that can vary manager by manager. But if they feel that you have their back, they're going to listen to you more, right? That you have to have their back. And I have periodically, though, have chosen to go around them, knowing that that's a violation of the hierarchy game and the rules. And you only get to pull that card once, and it better work, right? So I'll give you a direct example of that. I had two managers at a mobile game company I was at. And I really wanted to build a technology platform that would enable multiplayer gaming on cell phones. And there wasn't really, and we called them cell phones at that time, not mobile. And there wasn't really any company out there doing it at the level that I thought that we could. And my direct managers thought it was a distraction. It would add too much complexity and overhead, and that it was unnecessary. But I felt really strongly about it. So I went to the CEO and I said, Will, I have this idea. Here's how I can get it done. I need these resources and this amount of money to do it. If I fail, you can fire me. And if I don't, I want to be promoted to vice president. And he said, Well, this is really going to upset so and so. And I went, Yeah, probably. And he said, Well, this will be fun to watch. And so he understood the game of business and was actually one of the most fun bosses I've ever worked for, in his approach to competition. And I learned a lot from him. But the interesting point was all throughout that 6 months that I was given the autonomy and the CEO executive sponsorship to do this initiative. Those two guys were throwing, bombs in my path at every direction, right? And there was all this nattering, and I just kept going. And then once I succeeded and I was promoted and I got a seat on the management team with that promotion and being the only woman, one of them who I thought I hated and has become a very close friend of mine, and I've worked for him several times throughout the years, he walked up to me afterwards and he goes, Well played, kid. Welcome to the club. And it blew my mind because that's where I understood that there is a game, right? And I was playing the game the way he would have played it. And he ultimately respected the fact that I won that round, right? And then we became great collaborators after that, because I think when people know that you're in it to win and you're a team player, that you want the whole team to win too, not just your own self-interest. But I knew that advancement of creating a multiplayer platform would actually contribute to our leadership profile as a company. And we were a startup, and I knew it was the right thing to do, and I was willing to fight for it. You don't get to do that every time, though, right? And of course, I had to make the stakes high enough that I would suffer the consequences if I didn't achieve it. Of course, the CEO was like, "Well, don't get too crazy with that." He had a concept of what he called noble failures, which is awesome, because a culture that doesn't allow people to fail will also not allow people to innovate, right? So it's just, there's a ratio. You don't want 80% of your efforts to be failures. It's got to be like maybe 20% or under, right? For it to show that the culture supports innovation. So that was a big turning point for me. And then also changing my attitude, showing up with like, how do we win? How do I do my part as this team player, not your team player, not telling you how you need to play your role, but make sure we're all passing the ball to each other smoothly and taking direction from our coach, right? Like letting the coach call the plays. I remember once we were in a meeting, it was an acquisition talk meeting, and I had interrupted the CEO. And that one guy that said, Welcome, to the club, kid. He pulled me aside and he said, Look, you're great in these meetings. So he knew how to talk to me by that time, like, give me some validation, not attack first, right? So he's also looking at, how do I get the most out of Nanea so she'll hear me? And he said, but you can't interrupt the CEO, because he needs to look like the leader of an awesome team, And I got that too. Like, that's true, right? I don't need to like make sure I'm the one shining in that moment. I need to make him look super smart for hiring me and putting me in charge of technology, right? And so, and make him look like he had built an awesome team. So that's where the game mission kind of comes into it, right? For me, what I found was there was also a really good learning of understanding how to build alliances, form alliances with other department heads and get them on my side, get them to feel that I was supporting them as well as a team player. And that, sometimes you hit a lot of resistance and you have to stick with it and keep going, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you can feel like they trust you. So it's building trust. I really shine when I think like what I want to do will also help other people. It's just something that really connects with me. And it has served me well in my career too. But it's also authentic to who I am.
You have the most insane and amazing stories, and I'm so glad you shared it. I'm wondering, so everything you're talking about, making those strategic moves, pulling that card, even though you can't pull it all the time, it takes
Right.
a lot of bravery to do
Mm-hmm.
that. Did
Mm-hmm.
you build that resiliency and bravery over time? And how did you build the confidence to go to someone and pull that card? Because that's hard. And I imagine people are listening to this being like, oh my God, she's insanely brave and amazing. But how do you get from like someone who's like an individual contributor who's like working their way up to doing something like you have done?
I was terrified to do that. So, well, one trick I also have realized, and okay, here's another metaphor. So, when you're a little kid and your friends are playing jump rope, especially double dutch, right? That was a big thing when I was a kid. And when I would first start doing it, I would just stand there for like 5 minutes doing this, trying to get the courage to jump in, and then you just jump, right? And in Hawaii, where I grew up, there's we have these things that are kind of like holes in rock formations by the ocean. And when the water comes in, if you jump in at the right time, it shoots you up in the air. And if you don't grab onto the side very quickly, it can suck you out to sea in the current. It's very dangerous. And we did it all the time as kids. But I can tell you the first time I jumped in, it probably took me 3 days of just standing there and chickening out.
Mm.
I have realized that when you just do this scary thing anyway, despite a lack of confidence, a lack of courage, you just do it anyway. The courage and the confidence actually shows up afterwards where you went, okay, I didn't die. That, wait, one note though, I'm not advocating people jump into these blowholes when you go to Hawaii. It's very dangerous, right? But definitely pitch your ideas even if you're terrified, okay? I realize there's a don't try this at home, kids kind of
Yeah.
disclaimer. um, but it is, the confidence does show up after the action, and then the more you do something, the easier it gets. So if you wait for the confidence to show up, you're not going to do it. And this is something maybe I see women tend to uh, retreat from, maybe more than men, I've observed. Different cultures too have challenges with self-promotion. It's not part of their culture. And so, but in Western business, especially in America, self-promotion is actually critical to being successful. So building that muscle, maybe getting coaching to help you with asking. And so, I just think it's kind of exposure therapy. When I would first start presenting, my hands would shake. I just had public speaking is terrified in general. And then people would come up to me afterwards and say, oh, that was so great. And I go, oh, I was so nervous. And they would tell me we couldn't tell.
Mm.
And I started to understand that what I'm feeling inside doesn't always manifest externally, and that I can just through my preparation, through coaching, get more and more comfortable with it and just doing it over and over. And now I'm very comfortable with it. So that let me know that you can get used to these things and you can grow confidence, but it happens with the doing, not with the waiting for the confidence and then doing.
You know, that advice is so inspiring to me because self promotion is something, even though I'm doing this podcast, that I struggle with for sure.
Yeah,
I've done hundreds of interviews and conversations that I never shared because I never intended to share the conversations because it felt weird to like send them into the void and like talk about myself.
yeah,
But then when people reached out to me sometimes for career advice, I'm like, oh, it would be really helpful if that person could hear from Nanea. It would be really helpful if that person could hear from this person. And so I've kind of just forced myself to start doing it. And I'm still nervous
right.
about doing this. So it's inspiring to me to hear that you've struggled with that because
I
I've
still
heard you
do.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I still do, with different things. And I also don't like rejection. It's really hard to deal with. But, as a founder, I just have to put myself out there and keep going. And sometimes you get told no so many times that it can be very disheartening. So being mission and purpose driven does help me. I think of the people counting on me on my team to execute. That helps my backbone get up. So I think all of us can find these little anchors and motivators, and it's different for everyone. But that thing that just makes you kind of get that grit, right? I have noticed, and I don't know what this is generationally, um, but I've noticed this with some of the younger people I interact with, is that maybe they're giving up a little too soon on some things. They're
Mm.
just giving away their power, their conviction, just a little too soon when it gets hard. I have noticed this in some cases, and it's concerning to me. And I feel like, how do we help people know that they do have the strength and the courage to push through this? It will change. And the hardness is actually hardening you in a positive way to identify, like, what is my leadership style? Sometimes I'll just step back and go, okay, Reeves, let's see how you handle this one. you know, like if I don't know how to do something, it's just kind of like, okay, let me figure it out. If somebody else can do this, so can I. And, I've been knocked about my whole life in many ways, right? Having to fight for just the right to be here. Let's find out what else I can do, right? And just dig in. And if it doesn't work, sometimes it will open up a door to something really unexpected as well, where it might, the attempt on one thing might turn into something else even more interesting. It's just taking the action and trying things out and taking some risk, but also kind of having some contingency plans and checkpoints. You do have
Mhm.
to be willing to shift based on incoming data. So having that game plan is important, but if the iceberg shows up, you don't want to stay the course if it's going to hit the iceberg, right? You have to course correct and iterate and plan for those things, and even start planning, what if an iceberg shows up? What do we do in that event? So that's all part of the game thinking, though, too, right?
When you talk about kind of getting knocked down, you also mentioned being mission driven. I love the mission of your company. Can you talk about those things in the context of TRIPP and building a company? I imagine that I mean, I haven't done that, especially like everything that you have done. And I'm so curious to know about the journey of entrepreneurship that you've been on from when you had the idea to build TRIPP to where you are now. You've been very successful fundraising. I already said this, but like I genuinely love your company. And so I'm just curious,
You've
what
been
has been the
using
journey?
you've been using our AI agent too, right?
I
Kokua?
have. I literally use it
Yeah.
all the time.
I love that because that was always the mission of the company, is to have someone be met with how do you feel right now, and to use technology to help them feel better. And there's a confluence happening right now that is so remarkable. And I hope that all of the people listening who are entrepreneurs just really open up to what's happening. There's a lot to be afraid of, but there's a lot of things that could really help a lot of people when you think of healthcare use cases with AI, et cetera, how to improve our day to day lives. And so our approach specifically is how to support someone's mental and emotional well-being, and not wait until it's in crisis mode, to think of it more proactively and preemptively, like we do our physical health. We know if we get the right amount of sleep, we eat healthy food, and we have a certain level of exercise to maintain fitness physically, we're going to maintain health, right? And support health span. There's an internal version of that, a mental and emotional version. As a young child, I was thrown into one of the worst scenarios, a little kid could be in,
Mm,
which I had a mother who suffered with terrible opioid addiction.
mm,
And it put me and my sisters at a lot of, I mean, we were very vulnerable as a result of having a mom who was checked out. What I understand now is my mother probably had other severe mental health conditions that she was trying to self-medicate. And I have some, she's gone now, but we were able to really meet each other with a lot of forgiveness and understanding, and that was very healing for both of us at that stage. I also understand that her being my mother made me a tough little fierce warrior girl, right? Because I had to be. And I look back sometimes. I have a little picture of me when I was 14 and just in the worst of it, right?
mm.
Self-destructive behavior fueled by anger and resentment. And sometimes I pull that picture up, and I have it on my dresser, and I go, look what we did, right? Like,
Oh,
because she didn't know at that time that she would end up like being on a podcast talking about her career to someone like you, right? And so that, there's a part of me that understands if someone like me can do it, other people can too. And it's really about just honoring the journey, even the bad parts of it, because it built a tremendous amount of strength and a mind that had to figure out at a very young age how to do really hard things. And I believe all of us have that in us, right? And somebody might not have had as difficult a journey, but all of us have overcome struggles that are way more challenging than having an idea and bringing it forth. And so, it's really kind of dipping into what are those inner mantras that you need to give yourself to keep going. So, with my career, I found that I'm not, I had to kind of start living life and learning how to do things. I'm not a product of an academic journey. That wasn't my approach. And I understand that maybe that might have kind of boxed me in too much, that the wild mind that I had that was allowed to show up because I didn't have any kind of, I was raised by wolves, right? So being a bit feral might have served me, right? It's all kind of our unique journey, and how do we honor that? And for a long time, I felt very apologetic of it, but I taught myself how to show up to work. I taught myself how to code. I was interested in things and followed my curiosity. And my friend started a web development company, and she was getting so slammed with work, and I needed to make money. My husband at that time, I got married very young, and he got sick and I had to go to work, and I said, "Hey, can I come like be one of your coders?" And she said, "Sure." She had like 10 people working for her, and they were doing all these movie websites, and it was, in that point in internet history in the 90s, late 90s, where everybody wanted a website, but they didn't know how to make them. And she really made a business out of that. And people liked me in that environment. That we had big customers. We worked with Mattel, we worked with Fox, we worked with Sony. And one of the companies we worked for, they went to, it was the Earthlink internet company. The founder of Earthlink, Sky Dayton, went to go start an LA tech incubator called E Companies. And he bought my friend Karen's company. And we all got this amazing job working at this tech incubator, prototyping business ideas. And then we would sit around the table with the leadership team, and they would decide whether they would fund those ideas. And so I got to see that side of the table and how it worked. And it was the best business school I could have ever been in. And I also understood something different about business, that there was a completely different game beyond just showing up and getting a paycheck, that there was deal flow and acquisition, and I got like the biggest check of my life ever, which wasn't that much in hindsight, but it was enough for me to buy a, a really badass truck with cash and go skiing every weekend, for a couple winters, right? And so I went, wow, this is really fun. No one told me that that's what could happen when you show up to work, right? So I was learning and accumulating information. When I give people advice on what to do strategically with their career, if they have an idea, if I had shown up with the idea for TRIPP without kind of having a track record, no venture capital firm would have a meeting with me. It's just, I don't have a history. I'm not a known entity. Maybe if I had built an MVP of the product and got some market traction, but that takes resources. And if you don't have it, that can be incredibly difficult to even achieve. So what I realized, though, because I was at that incubator, I had opportunities available to me. One, I ran product at a startup that failed immediately. It was like I was crying. And as I was crying, they were pulling me on the side going, "Hey, there's this new thing that Sprint's funding, making games for cell phones. Do you want to work on that?" And again, I understood something about my failures don't have to define me, and it was kind of that learning how to fail fast and get out really quickly if it wasn't going to work. But I jumped into that mobile game company, and it was a rocket ship. And, we were hugely successful in the early days of digital content distribution, app downloads, and we went public. We got acquired by Electronic Arts. And I will say, being part of that team that hit a home run changed my whole life, because many years later, when I had my own idea, doors opened for me and people had the meetings with me, and they were willing to take the risk on me because I had been part of a team that had succeeded. So I also understood in that moment that it wasn't a boys' club. It was a winner's circle. And that people who have won before are easier to fund because they mitigate risk, right? And so they're all looking, if they love your idea, the next thing they're going to decide is, are you capable of executing on that idea? And so what do you ground that proof point on, right? Having been part of a successful team that hit a home run. So my advice to people, get it in their early stages of their careers, find that company that's already got product market fit. They're at Series A or late seed funding where they've got traction. They look like they're, on a trajectory that's awesome, and get into that company because the association with that will change your ability to get your own ideas funded. Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense because you're kind of validating your existence and your vision before you even start to build your own
Right.
company.
And it's a strategy, right? Because you're building the career social proof, as it were, to start building your own personal brand as somebody who contributes to success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from that company, then I stayed at the acquiring company, which was Electronic Arts, and did some really, I believe, I'm really proud of the work we did there as well. I stayed for 5 years. And then I went to another startup that also was acquired and very successful. So you start to kind of build your career brand, and it's got a strategy to it, right? Where I was running tech and operations at that mobile game company. Then I ran a very technical team at Electronic Arts, and we built digital revenue streams that didn't exist before. Like we built the foundational infrastructure for that. And then I, helped a team that was not live yet with their tech go live, and also was part of the fundraising process. So, it was also like I was leveling up with each one. And I think that helped me. And not everything was, successful either. I had a couple other journeys after that that were okay, but they weren't as successful as the others. But I also believe that somebody who's very well rounded and sees what works and what doesn't work, has some failures as well under their belt, it makes for a really well rounded leader that I think you can form a narrative around that will also create more confidence in you and your ability to execute. Because that's really kind of the big thing when you walk in anywhere, whether it's for a job offer or not, is, you know, how are you going to solve their problem or this problem, and why you're the person that is going to do this rather than someone else. And that story has to come from you, and take the time to really build the career track record that is foundational. And it's kind of like your own credit score as it were, right, on it. And then also the relationships that you have with people, because all the back channeling and the narratives also support that story, right? Because people, they pick up the phone, right? What was she like? To do, sometimes a pain in the ass, but she gets stuff done. That I know gets said about me for sure.
When you were in those earlier chapters, was your end game always to be the CEO of your own company? Did you always have entrepreneurship at the forefront of your strategy?
Well, no, I'm the CEO, but I knew that I had an innovative mind, and people would have specific charters or missions. And I was starting to build the confidence and understanding that maybe it comes from being that little girl in trouble and having to figure out how to take care of a newborn baby at age 6, right? Like, you know, my mind will go, how do we make this work? Right. And how to break it down as opposed to dismissing it as too hard or impossible. It's more like, how do we get this done? So there was something about that is very much an entrepreneurial brain, but I was very comfortable in being a strong number two. I like being a lieutenant. I've worked for some great people. And after my husband passed away, it's been almost 10 years now. It's 9.5 years since he left. And as I was emerging from that grief process, because it was very sudden and it felt like it just whacked both of us right upside the head, and it changed everything for our family and our community. And it was in that space of figuring out, how do I go forward, that the thought occurred to me that it was time to ask myself, what was my idea that I wanted to bring forth? And I had had the good fortune of being an early investor in the Oculus team before they got their Series A done. And that got me access to VR devices. And there was something about that technology that really excited me and like sparked a lot of curiosity around how you could use that tech in ways to make people feel better, because it was so easy to manufacture fear in virtual reality that I kept walking away with this, what else could you make someone feel, right? And as I was asking myself that question of what do I do next with my life, I did acknowledge it was time for me to be CEO. And it was time to support my own ideas. I had spent a lot of time supporting other people's idea. And just in asking, what is that? What do I want to build? I had a strong meditation practice. I loved playing video games. And many times, like when I played video games, it was a mental health outlet or retreat for me. And and there's something about that VR immersive technology that was really inspiring to me. And I kept thinking about that idea. And yeah, I started noodling it, put a pitch together. I started investigating a lot of the neuroscience researchers who had been working on how to use VR to address mental health concerns, and put a pitch together around adaptive experiences that learn how to support you over time. And, now we're looking at spatial computing, ambient computing, and AI all coming together. It's like the perfect storm for exactly what I need to support that vision. And so it was 6 years ago, we got funded on an idea, and I was really honored to have the Mayfield Fund team step up to support this mission. They've been incredibly supportive of me as a founder all throughout. And since then, we've been able to get even more investors of the highest caliber with Bitcraft Ventures, Amazon Alexa Fund, Qualcomm, HTC, and many others who have rallied around this mission to use tech for good. But I also believe it can be a huge business, because I'm so inspired by the way young people are demanding that they that their mental health concerns be addressed. I'm from that generation where I was taught just to suck it up. And there's some benefits to that, right? But it can also create a very unhealthy approach to your day-to-day life, right? When you're not learning how to manage your stress. And so I just became very inspired by all of that. And running a startup is not easy, for sure. So the mission has to excite you. So maybe when I see people kind of give up too soon, maybe they didn't spend enough time investigating, like, do I really want to keep showing up for this and fight for this idea, right? So if I could encourage anyone to find whatever that thing is that you're passionate about, that you're willing to go, like, ask the scary boss for support. And I think women especially should be careful not to fall into the mentor trap, where it's like, oh, sure, I'll mentor you. You want executive sponsorship. You want your ideas to be supported with air cover, executive support, and budget,
Hmm.
because that's what's going to change your career. And at every level, you can do that. You can go to your boss and say, I have an idea on how to save us money and do this more quickly, which also translates to being more efficient, right? Anybody can do that. And that's really, I think, um, the person who does those kind of things in their day to day is the one that's going to be successful in an organization. Anybody can pitch those ideas, right? One thing you do as a woman when you pitch your ideas and you measure the success of it, etc., self-promotion can oftentimes be tricky for women specifically because we get judged more harshly on that. And I don't know why. I don't know why that's I've seen this over and over. And so the trick that I've done with that is to also include other colleagues to say, oh, we did, and I say we more than I, oh, we did this thing, and so was so helpful to the initiative. And do you know, so it's just kind of a style thing that I found helped lessen some of the pushback I would get on highlighting the success of something. It's unfortunate that you have to do it, but it's kind of a reality, right?
Yeah. I have so many questions for you. First of all, you're amazing. When you talked about like being a warrior kid and looking back on that young girl, it's such a beautiful sentiment. I mean, you like when I think of you and like when I hear your story and when I've heard your story in the past, like you really are a warrior. You're so resilient. I'm sorry for all the things you've had to go through. And I hope that
Yeah.
if someone is hearing your story and they're in a chapter that's darker than they would like to, they feel a sense of community and they look at your journey kind of similar to how you would look back and be like, wow, this person went through something that is so, so hard. And look at everything that they created. So thank you for your beautiful vulnerability.
I appreciate that. I will say that the gift of a meditation practice has taught me how to reframe things so that they support me more. I was very stuck in my teen years in just seeing myself as broken and damaged. And it fueled a lot of self-destructive, this is not fair kind of motivations that I believe would have killed me ultimately, because I know that to be true. My sister could not get out of that mindset. And in many ways, her damage was even greater than mine. Um, she was always kind of seeking love where I shut down and became
Mm.
hardened by it. And ultimately we lost her to a drug addiction, and she could just never quiet the noise in her head, and she could not reframe it in a way that empowered her, and I don't think that there was anything different about me or her. The only difference, I think, was that a therapist gave me the gift of meditation at a crucial time, and my sister just was not willing to change the way she looked at what was happening to her. I don't know if it's a willingness or whether she was capable of it. Maybe the fact that I was more open to asking and receiving help than she was. But I look back at all of those things and I go, okay, if we can do one thing with TRIPP, is help people build those muscles where they can advocate for themselves and learn how to ask for professional help when they need it, and learn how to build an emotional language and an inner voice that's much more healthier and supportive of their own journey. This is where we can have huge impact in the world, one person at a time, because anybody who steps into that, from one point of damage to, for lack of a better term, into the light, a more positive state of mind, I'm a better citizen. I'm a better partner. I'm a better relative, a better daughter, all around. I'm a better partner, better boss. And this is how we can transform the world, right? So I look at some of these young people struggle with a sense of agency over how they feel I don't know if that's because they've been marketed to a lot harder than my generation with what's coming in their social feed. But I feel very motivated to help them get the tools so that the vulnerable ones don't end up like my sister and other people I've seen like her. Yeah. And also, there was a turning point for me in my own journey where I could have gone down that route,
Mm.
road. And it was based on the compassion of someone else who saw me, but also my own willingness to show up to survive, right? And take care of myself. So it's all part of it. And you know what's really inspiring, Jane, is like Trip is just one of many companies trying to look at how do we bring tools forth, right? There's something really awesome happening right now. And I think it is driven by the needs of these younger generations to want to learn how to navigate their inner life in a way, because externally the world appears to be more complicated, but in many ways one of the best times to be alive ever, right? Yeah.
So thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing story. I'm sorry about everything you said about your sister, of course, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that so that if someone is struggling right now, they see your journey and they see everything that you've done and they see how resilient you have been. You are so
So many families though, right? Especially with fentanyl in the system. That one boss I had, the welcome to the club kid guy, he and I have become really good friends, and I've worked for him several times after that at different companies. And but he lost his 18-year-old son to fentanyl
mm,
overdose during the pandemic. And we need people to have alternatives for how to support how they're feeling. And I hope that trip can be a part of that, to just help open up someone's mind to there are other ways to interact with how you're feeling, and build that muscle to want to get help. That's really the big thing, is how to build enough self-esteem and inner resilience to say, hey, I'm not doing well, I need help, right? That's really the big thing. That's what got me in that therapist's office at
mm.
age 15. And so uh yeah, in a way I feel like it almost honors my sister's journey to be motivated to want to help others with it, that her example might inspire someone also to not. She was so amazing. Like, she had the biggest heart ever, and all she wanted to do was be loved. And it was in that vulnerability, I think, that, she exposed herself to even more damage, because she just didn't have the tools.
Mm.
So it's really about how do we use these technologies to create tools, but also help lower the access issue. Not everyone can afford to even get professional help, but or understand how. We never want to be a replacement for that at Trip. It's just more like a container where you feel safe enough to just connect to yourself, connect to breath, and then start to insert that pause that might promote a different reaction to something, right?
Truly, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and advice and for sharing your story. I cannot tell you how inspired I am every time I talk to you and I learn more about you. I am very grateful. I'm truly honored to be able to share this and to share some of your story, which is just incredibly empowering. And
Well, I will say though, to give some of that back to you, Jane, like, you reached out to me. I think it was during the pandemic too, right? Because you were,
yeah,
writing an article, and you were very persistent and pleasant to interact with as well. And I mean, you did something. It was very interesting to watch how you had collected all this input from many different people, myself included, and now you are building your own platform. It's great. So, I'm excited to see where you are in 10 years. Hopefully I'll be healthy enough to still be here. I'm working on that. And yeah. So.
That means so much to me. And thank you. And the way that like TRIPP has been your mission, I've been really empowered lately to just share career stories to help people who are navigating those types of struggles feel less lost. So genuinely, I'm so grateful to be able to share your story as a part of this.
Thank you so much. It's an honor. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Your Career Unscripted. If something about this conversation inspired you, I'd love to know. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn at Jane Bernhard if there's a guest you'd want to hear from, or if there's a type of background you'd like to learn from, and I'll do my best to make it happen. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to my Substack and socials, follow Texas Immersive Institute, and check out TXI's Patreon at patreon.com/Texas Immersive for more thought leadership on the immersive field. And of course, please share the episodes with anyone who you think might find them helpful. See you next time.